Okay, are you guys ready? Fantastic. Well, hey, thank you. I'm the last speaker rounding up the day. I have a little bit of stuff on .NET Core 3. Just as a warning, I was in Orlando this morning and woke up at like 2 a.m. Pacific time to get back here for this event. So hopefully this is all going to come out right. I'm going to try to speak slowly. I've had this habit of listening to podcasts on 1.5 speed. And it really messes your whole life up because then you expect life to go by about anyway. So, does anybody know what this is?
Not I. Oh, I do.
Can anybody name the manufacturer?
I do.
And can anyone name the model? Oh, nobody. Well, no, it was the competitor to the Commodore 64. Close, a competitor. What's that? It's not a VIC-20. That was a cousin to the Commodore 64. This is an Atari 800 computer. This is the computer that I developed my love for writing software on. And like I said, I watched this 8-bit legacy, and it doesn't really talk about this, but it talks about the company Atari, and it talks about kind of the early days of video game making and how you would program a game in like 4 kilobytes. The whole thing would be that size. And I remember when I had this computer, I thought, and I think I actually thought correctly, that, if I study long enough, I am going to know everything about this computer. And I'll know exactly how the processor works because you know how many transistors it had? There were almost 5,000 transistors on that CPU. Do you know how many transistors this one has? The number starts with the B, right? It's in the billions, like 2.1 or somewhere around there is about how many transistors. And all of the I/O and all that stuff was like knowable. And just to say that, I was struggling as I put this together, like, how much can you actually know? And you have to decide as a person that is in this field, what are you going to know? Because unlike this, where I thought I could know it all, and then I realized all of a sudden, once you know it all, then you don't know because it all moves, right? And so all of a sudden, someone moves our cheese, and it's about every, 3 to 5 years if you're really lucky, you then can, you have to now learn, you get to learn something new, which is fantastic. I really like that. And I think that all of us, if you're here, you must have some kind of a love for learning new stuff and discovering new things. I think just figuring out and understanding, I can't know it all. And what's the piece that I can know? So what I'm going to try to do today is give you a little bit of what is coming in .NET Core, or what has arrived. Let me say that. It has arrived in 3.0. This is really, who's familiar with .NET Core? So familiarity, so a lot of folks. So Microsoft moved from the .NET full framework, which was a Windows only plus some Xamarin and Mono outliers, to .NET Core, which is a cross-platform framework designed that way from the very beginning. And they're having to work through some growing pains, and we'll talk about a few of those growing pains as we get going. But we're now on version 3.0, so there have been a whole bunch of versions all the way from beta, all the way through the 1.0 sequence, the 2.0 sequence, and now we're on the 3.0 sequence. And I would really say that this is what I would call an evolutionary change. It's not a revolutionary change. Like when we added generics to .NET, I thought that was a real kind of revolutionary change. It changes how we think about writing software. There's a few things in here that are more impacts from C# that may kind of get that way when you look at some of the nullability stuff that Mark talked about. But really, this is just adding and fixing and bringing fullness to the .NET Core cross-platform framework. So we have the C# 8 stuff, which we'll talk about. We have JSON native. In the past, we used the JSON library from Newtonsoft. Now there's native stuff, although I don't know if I'd quite switch yet. There's lots of, who uses Entity Framework? Anybody? Okay, great. Tons of folks. Entity Framework, fantastic. When I was writing some of my first projects, I had to write my own kind of thing, and it was horrible compared to what you can do with Entity Framework. Great stuff there. There's a few good things in ASP.NET Core. They've done a few things, but a lot of it's fairly transparent. And then some cool things with standalone executables. And so what I want to do is I'm just going to go through slides because I heard that the more slides you have, you win. And so this is just going to be pure slideware. So this is just a little bit of versioning stuff. It's important to kind of understand how this works. So when you look at the versioning, you'll understand what you're getting. And so the .NET Core comes in two flavors. You're getting your core runtime, which is what you would need to like install on a server to run a website or something like that, and then your SDK, which is required to do development. And so you can see how those are versioned. All your SDKs are going to have like a 100 type nomenclature, and then they can patch the SDK without patching the runtime, and you can then see how those things move along, and they don't necessarily always stay in sync. So you get just a little bit of an idea for what those look like. And then I want to spend a second on .NET Standard. Who's familiarity with .NET Standard? Who understands .NET Standard? Okay, great, that's all of us. .NET Standard, I think the concept was hard for me to grab onto because Microsoft's had several things and several tries at this in the past, and this is not a .NET Standard talk. We would need to do a talk on .NET Standard just to get it all and figure it all out. But suffice it to say, this is a little bit outdated Venn diagram, and I didn't have time to draw my own, so I stole one. The idea with .NET Standard is it is the common piece between the frameworks. And if you can imagine, this circle in the middle started out much, much smaller. And it was a small set of kind of core things you could do with the language. And then as over time, that circle has expanded to fill almost all of those different flavors of frameworks. So for example, you have .NET Core, Xamarin, UWP, .NET, the full framework, 4.6, 4.7. Those kinds of things as that goes out. Now we're up to 2.2, or I'm sorry, 2.1 here in 3.0, and I think there may be one more coming. Well, obviously there will be more coming. But the idea is that as these grow, the footprint of functions grows with them, and so you get more and more things. Now, it's not the kind of thing where you want to use the latest one. Actually want to use the smallest one that you can, because that's showing that you have the smallest possible footprint. And if you're, for example, releasing a DLL, that is, I want to use Net Standard 1.6, that's all I need. You can use that, and then that says, hey, I'm only using these things. So it's not necessarily about having the biggest number, which you would normally chase. It's kind of about going in the other direction. Any questions so far? These are kind of just some real fundamental kind of pieces. Yeah?
Just one comment. If you're writing an application, you actually want to use the highest version because that gives you the most APIs that you can have access to. If you're writing an API that other people are using,
right.
you want to be the lowest version. So just to be clear, it depends on which side you're at. From an application perspective, use .NET 3.0, rely on as much of the libraries as possible.
Right.
If you're writing an API, you want to be lower because then you're going to be used by more.
Right. For example, in your DLL projects, specify them as .NET Standard. In your actual executables, specify .NET Core. .NET Core 3 in this case is what we're going to be talking about. So.
And one other comment is I don't think there's another .NET Standard. I think it's unlikely.
Oh, really?
So .NET Standard 2.1 is probably the latest because after .NET 3, .NET Core 3, we're going to get, so let's be very clear about names. After .NET Core 3 comes .NET 5. And .NET 5 is a convergence of everything, both in Android and in .NET Core, into the same code base. And so they don't need to have a .NET Standard because it will all be merged into one code base. I want to be very careful when I say about that. .NET Framework was rumored or was actually announced to be part of that merging. That is now called into question. If you talk to the .NET team, I'm not sure that the .NET Framework will be included in .NET 5. The latest .NET Framework release is probably going to be 4.8. They're not going to do another one except for security patches. But it's unlikely that they will release another .NET Standard because if they merge everything from Xamarin and .NET Core into the same code base, they don't need to have a .NET Standard because it's the same code base.
Cool. Thanks for the clarification. Let's just look at a few simple things to kind of start us off. There's a few changes with when you call to see what version you're running, which can be an important thing, and then also getting single file executables. So I'm going to go talk about these things, and I'm going to drop over here to code. Look at this. This is not only not the dark version. It's not the light version. It's the light version with high contrast. I don't think anybody else used the high contrast light version, which you can read incredibly well, can't you? Isn't this the Yeah, isn't this the easiest with nice big fonts and everything? I don't. Oh, come on! I was going for. Actually, this is PowerPoint. I just copy and pasted. It's interactive PowerPoint. So let's just take a look at a couple of things here. Here's my program CS. This is just a simple thing here, and this, just some of these, getting the versions out, they've modified that. When I go in and look at versions, you can see a little bit different version information. Not super important, but the interesting thing to look at here, and the reason why I built this and put some code in it, was so that we could look at a project file. So publishing a single file. Now, in the old days, when you would build something, you would oftentimes get a single file out. When I first started compile. And then all of a sudden they made it so that you were compiling something and then you got a whole bunch of DLLs that came with it. And then they figured out how to link it all together and give me one file again. And now they're back to the other way of now we can share things and have all these files. And now we're going back to having you can now have a single executable, which is really just a whole bunch of files, a zip file that automatically self-extracts. And so when you do this, let me just show you what you're going to get. If I come in here to my console demo, and I go in the bin directory, debug, .NET Core. So I'm going down through the versions, and as you can see here, it's debug, .NET Core, or Core 3.0, and now I'm specifically in a Windows 10 x64 build. And here are all my files, and if I scroll down, here's a publish folder. And inside the publish folder is a single executable. And so what it's done is it's taken all those things, wrapped them together, compressed them, and it extracts them to your disk automatically. So let me just click on this. If I click on it, boom, there it goes. And there's a little 2-second delay before it closes there, so you can actually see the results. And it will, the very first time, extract, and it takes, I've actually run this once, so I did a little bit of a pull it out of the oven thing, but it takes a couple of seconds for it to extract. Once it does that, it extracts it to a common location and then runs it from that location without having to re-extract. And so you can embed the whole thing. Yeah, go ahead.
So I've asked a number of people, even some Microsoft people, where is that common location?
You know, I didn't. That's a great question. And I didn't go and find it, and I probably should have. It would be really easy to find just by putting a little watcher on this and seeing where it's writing files. So, yeah. Oh, I would have guessed it was an app data. Yeah. I'm sorry, yeah, I'm not sure. I almost expected to see it underneath here. The way the documentation read, I expected to see it here, but it's not there. So yeah, Phil. Oh, sorry. Question was, where are the files? So if this is really just a zip file that's getting expanded and with all the DLLs in your executable and then run, where does it keep it? And not sure. So I was afraid someone was going to ask me that. And so I had to build all this thing while I was at our place down in Orlando. And in order to spend more time with your family, they charge you $47 a day for Wi-Fi. And so I'm sitting there trying to do this with minimal internet. So yeah, that's one of the questions I don't have an answer to. I apologize. So anyway, this is pretty cool, especially if you want to be able to deliver applications and things like that. It's a nice way to be able to package things up. Now, with that being said, let me show you a couple other things. So this one here, publish trimmed. I'll pop back to this. This is essentially tree shaking. So what happens is when I say I want all this stuff, here's what I'm building with, and I compile it, I'm going to get extra things that I don't necessarily need. Now, when I have my executable, I don't want all that extra stuff. And so what this will do is it will go through and shake out all the stuff that I don't need for my specific application. It'll go through and say, what are all the dependencies, and then get rid of all those dependencies inside of that executable so that my executable can be as small as possible, which in my case is a whopping 25 megabytes. But this is a full-featured application. I mean, it displays 3 lines of text. So, right, absolutely. So it's the whole thing. I mean, there is a runtime. Yeah, I'm selling it a little bit short. But yes, there's more going on here, and obviously you could do much, much more than what I am just doing in this little application. So any questions so far? Those kinds of things. Great, let's keep going. So let's talk a little bit about compilation. Anybody familiar with tiered compilation? This is where there's This is where there's a couple different kinds of compiling. So when you get your initial just set of code that then gets compiled down on the fly, JITted, just-in-time compiled, there are different types of algorithms you can use. And so oftentimes when an application's starting up, what do you care most about? Speed. You want it to compile quickly, and you want it to get running really fast. And this is the beauty of what they've done with .NET, is that, so you grab the code, you compile it, you get it running, and you spend a little bit of time compiling it. Now, if we would have spent more time compiling it, we, the compiler, would have spent more time compiling it, it would run faster, right? So we're trading off. Now, why not just have the compiler do that while the program's running? Right? Be able to swap out and recompile a faster version that we can now begin to use. So these are some of the options with this, so you have some control over how this works. And especially now that we're doing pre-compiled executables, where you can compile them for a particular platform, this becomes something that you may want to be able to do. Again, it's just a really easy way. If you know you're going to target one environment all the time, you can release a pre-compiled version. And there are a couple of limitations. For example, on a Windows machine, I cannot compile a Linux executable. I still have to have a Linux machine to compile that executable. So there isn't cross-targeting yet. I'm hoping that will come at some point in time, so you could kind of give a broad spectrum of stuff. Although usually the JITting doesn't take that long, so it's not usually a huge deal. And that's the exact case where you can. So there is that case. There's about 3 or 4 that you can cross-compile from Windows to other ones. But they're all Windows flavors, just like an ARM. And I forget if it's x86 or x64. There's a list of them on the new stuff page from Microsoft. There's a change where when you do a build, your dependencies are getting copied automatically to your build folder, which was not the way it was before. It was only done on publish. And then there's also another option to do a major version roll ahead. And what this does is you can set your project by putting a project attribute in there that will automatically roll forward and upgrade your project to the next version of .NET. Now, I don't know if this is a great idea or not, but it does kind of push you to go forward, because what I've found is that if you try to, whenever you do maintenance on your project, to upgrade it to the latest stuff, you're going to experience less pain over time rather than trying to take that all in one big bite. You know, and then, oh man, zillion things are broken. It's easier to kind of move it along a little bit at a time, release often, even if you're not making changes. And this kind of goes back a little bit to, I'm going to use the word DevOps, even though Phil said not to use that. The reason to do that oftentimes is as things are changing, especially if you're riding the JavaScript crazy train with all these different versions of libraries, that even if you're not making changes to your executables, you're not making changes to your applications, redeploying them is pretty important, because you want to be able to pick up those new versions of things. And you just want to go through and upgrade, make sure everything's working. No new features, but try to keep them up to date if you can, because oftentimes it's going to do 2 things. It's going to keep your software secure, and it's also going to exercise your pipelines to make sure that when you do have to do a release, that the process for doing the release is a well-oiled machine, and it's not like, oh no, I gotta go touch that thing. We haven't even released it for 3 years. I mean, that's not the boat you want to be in when it comes to having to make a critical fix. Any questions so far? So the next little piece that we're going to get into are items that are kind of overlapping from the C#8 world and the .NET Core. So because the C# is really how we code in .NET Core in a lot of ways, or how many of us do, there's things that if you add something to C#, you have to add support for that to .NET Core. And so we'll talk about a few of these things. I kind of picked out the ones that I thought were the most interesting. The first one is a new concept called indexes and ranges. And this is a way, and I'm just going to show you the code. It's going to be a little bit simpler to just look at the code. So here's my test. By the way, this project will be available. It has a bunch of unit tests to show a bunch of the different features, and it also has a DB context. But I did want to show you this. I did just upgrade Visual Studio while I was standing back there about a half hour ago. So that way if things go wrong, it's just the fault of Visual Studio. But if you look at this and you run, Mark said this, analyze code coverage. Like, check this out. This is about as good as it gets. So I don't think I've ever had a program that was like this before in my life, but this one actually has really good test coverage. So here's an array, just 6-element array, bunch of integers. And have you ever wanted to say, I just want the last item in the array? Or I want the third to the last item in the array. And it's like, okay, figure out how many things, index, length, minus, oh, is the length the number of elements, and so I have to subtract a certain number. So this makes it really easy. So if you want the last element in the array, it's just this syntax. So you use the caret 1, that just means last item. Caret 2 is second to the last item. So in this case, it returns a 4. So pretty nice. Again, are you going to use this every day? No. But when you need to get to the last item really quickly, it's way better than writing arr.length minus 1 and put that in brackets. This is just a way simpler way to do that. Here's another, and here's a couple more examples just going after these. Now this is a little bit weird. It took me a second to wrap my head around this, but if you notice, the last element is caret what? Caret 1. What's the first element of an array? 0. Okay? Now, caret 0 throws an exception. Okay? So it's it's 0 based from the beginning and kind of 1 based from the end. And so you just have to put that in your head and say, this is how this works. Now, it makes a little bit more sense once we get into the ranges, because it's a little more clear why it's that way. And Mark's going to make a comment here as I'm talking bad about C#. So it seems interesting. So what, this one here? That's a great question. I'm going to let people that really care about that stuff answer it.
So the index operator translates in IL to a new index data type. Data type that takes an integer value. Boolean will count from the left or count from Boolean will count from the right. So it just takes those two values. If you put the hat operator in IL, that translates to a new index value 1 counting from the right. And it is an operator, but more accurately, it's a new way, it's a new literal. So we've never had a new literal introduced in the language since C# 1.0. It's actually a new literal. It's a new way to express an index rather than saying new index. It's actually literal, just like when you express a string with quotes, blah, 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 quotes. That's a literal for a string. This is a new way to express a literal for an index, and then similarly, we're going to show you for a range.
So it is more performant than array.length minus 1.
It is more performant than array. It is because you have to do a calculation.
Somebody has to do it.
I would say it's similar performance.
Yeah, you still have to do it.
What's interesting about it is you could write your own collections that work with the index operator. And so there's another thing to think about. The reason why it counts from 0 is it's essentially trying to mimic what you would do if you did length minus. So
Yep,
the way
right.
to remember this is if I was going to do a length minus, then the index operator that has a hat before it, that 1 is because you did length minus 1. It maps into that value. So this is more a memorization.
Yeah, it is. You just
think about it conceptually as a length minus 1, and that allows that 1 is the last element in the array, the 1 after that. And I'll let Grant explain range, because that's where it actually
right. It kind of starts to make sense. Yeah, so it does make sense.
That's one way to memorize it. So the length, 1 minus the length.
Right. So here you have a range, and again some new syntax with the dot dot, and being able to say grab this set, so that's going to grab me 3 of them, again from 0 to 2 in this case. And if you come down here, this is where it gets kind of interesting. If you do this, whenever you use the hat, right, it's going to count from the right, come back, but it's exclusive of the last item. Okay, so
The range operator.
right. Sorry, when you use this, so 3 ... from the right 0, it's going to actually take the whole all the way from the right. If I put a 1, it doesn't take the last item. So it always excludes. It's inclusive of the first, exclusive of the second. And so so you get this. And really, I'm not going to go in and spend a ton of time on this, but if you look at the examples, you can kind of see I tried to walk myself through all these things. That's why I wrote all these tests, so that I could go through and understand how does this work in all the different cases. And so you kind of get an idea of how do we do this. And you can see 2 different ways this is done. Here, I'm going after it and putting it in line right inside of the array. And instead of pulling out one item, I'm going to pull out essentially a slice of that array. And here, I'm creating a formal range object with this syntax, and then asking for the range here, and it's returning it. Essentially doing the same thing. One is really just inlined, one has an object that we're creating. Okay, any questions? Range index? Helpful?
When did the Ruby guys stage a coup
It feels like everybody is copying from everybody these days, which is kind of cool. I mean, I see a lot more convergence than we have in the past, where people don't feel like what everybody else is doing is horrible.
It also seems like R or Python, when you look at the index, there's one of the different ranges within.
Right.
The difference being that this is a data type, and it's not a data type in Python. Right? In Python, it's actually an operator that compiles down to something else. In this case, you actually have a data type that you can modify and interact with, and none of the other languages support that.
Cool. Anything else on that part? This just really quickly covering this async streams to be able to await a for loop without having to do some other. There's other parallel fors that you can do. This just gives you a nice simple way to do that, to be able to yield results as they come back. There's some good examples online. I'm not going to go into much detail here. Again, not a ton of detail, but they did update. Who's used floating points before? How many people think floating points are the devil? If you don't, you just haven't used them enough. Use decimals if you can, because they don't have the same kind of errors. But as you know, floating points, they eventually have rounding errors, because it's not really that number, it's just something close, because it's a certain amount of stuff and then some exponents, and you get into rounding problems. And so IEEE came up with some standards as far as how this should be handled to minimize rounding errors. Well, that wasn't exactly how .NET Core was written, and so they have modified some of those things, and they've actually added some things like this. I thought it was really clever, like this bit increment. You can take a double and say, I want to go 1 bit larger, and it'll give you that number, or 1 bit smaller. And so you can see exactly what the precision of your numbers are and how much they're changing with just a single bit of your float being changed. So again, I'm not sure how useful this was, but when I was looking at it, it's like, oh, this is pretty interesting. And there's like the max magnitude and stuff like this. I think they're just some shortcut ways to get around doing some things that can be problematic when you have very, very large or very, very small numbers dealing with positives and negatives and things like that. Again, it's just really compliance with this IEEE standard. So I just wanted you to know, because if you work with doubles, if you work with very large, very small, this may really help you. And there's a bunch more of this stuff. Yeah, go for it.
Interesting story. We actually had some source code that ran a unit test, and we upgraded, and the source code failed.
Because of this?
Because of this.
Oh, because the doubles.
We actually contacted Microsoft, and it was a bug, but it was most of
Yeah. It has, so the results of the functions dealing with floats, again, at the extremes, will be different. You will have different results because the rounding errors that used to be there are still there, but they're not as great, because there will always be rounding errors with floats. And instead of floats, you're going to use a decimal. Okay, great. Just make sure we're all good on that.
The double in bit is the double that you want to increment,
That you want to increment, right.
not the number of bits.
No, right. No, it'll increment.
1.3 bits.
Yeah, a double number of bits. That's super helpful, isn't it? Okay, let's talk about JSON. Who's using JSON on a somewhat regular basis? How about XML and SOAP? Ah, brave souls that say that. Yes, that's good. So JSON, JSON we've always used. Does anybody know? Newtonsoft, the famous Newtonsoft JSON serializer, deserializer, parser, all the stuff that Newtonsoft brought to the table. They have officially been fired, I guess. And their stuff has been dropped from the core piece of .NET. Oh, that's what they just bought them. Of course, if in doubt, buy it. So they've added, so the UTF-8 JSON reader and the UTF-8 JSON writer are kind of the two core pieces of functionality that they brought to the table to do this. And essentially, these are somewhere, I mean, there's some debates between 30% and 100% faster than the counterparts. And the real key here is they wanted to use UTF-8 internally. So all strings represented by UTF-16, which are 2 bytes all the time. And they wanted to be able to use less memory when they're doing these operations and use UTF-8 instead, where it only uses extra bytes if you actually need the extra bytes in the string, rather than just essentially if you're dealing with ASCII or something like that, you have double the amount of characters that you need as far as bytes stored in memory. And almost everything that comes in off the web is coming in UTF-8. I mean, there's tons of stuff comes in UTF-8. Why bother to do all these transitions? And so they did this. The key piece here is the JSON document, which is your document reader. And then there's also the JSON serializer and deserializer, which I'll show you in just a second. So let's pop over here, take a look at the serializer and deserializer. So here's the document test. And this is just a really simple, here's Peter Parker, Spider-Man, his enemies. And we're going to take this and throw it into a JSON document. We're going to parse that out, and we're going to pull out this particular property name and pull out what the name is and say it is equal to Peter Parker. And it's going to handle our array just like we would expect it to do. And this is much like the XML one that's been available for a very, very, very long time. Works kind of the same way. It's going to give you back a root node. You can navigate from there. The other one is the serializer. And so here, I'm creating a superhero object, an ID, an alias, and their super name. And I added some enemies here. And I serialize over here to, I serialize the super into the super JSON, and then I make a copy of that, and then I just make sure that they're the same. So it's really pretty simple, simple serialize, deserialize. Now, there's some limitations that haven't been fixed yet. So there are some serialization challenges with nullable. When we get into the nullability stuff, which we're unfortunately not going to cover a lot, we probably need to do a whole, one of these evenings and just cover nullability. Because while it sounds really simple, hey, we're just going to make it so that reference types can't be nullable by default, there's really a whole bunch of stuff that you have to start doing to make that really work well. Because I modified my project, said, oh, I'm just going to turn on all this stuff, and there's lots of warnings and things that were telling me I was doing it wrong, and things that, if I have time, I'll just cover them real briefly. But yeah, anyway, it gets to be a little bit complicated, especially when it comes to, if you don't have nullable types, you have to have a constructor that sets all of your types or initializers on each property to set those types to be whatever value they're going to be, so they're not null. The serializer needs a parameterless constructor. It fundamentally breaks some of those other things. So thinking through some of these issues. It also does not handle reference loop handling well. You know how the Newtonsoft, if you've used any kind of a complicated object model where you have a parent has reference to a collection of children, and guess what? The children have a reference to the parent. And so you have this thing, and it starts to serialize, and all of a sudden, this blows up after 1,000 iterations, where the Newtonsoft one actually has a parameter you can set. And say, whenever you loop around, either reference or just drop it. So that's not here yet. I would expect it soon, but it's not here yet. So anyway, just FYI, this is the standard serializer moving forward. So I think Microsoft has done a good job, and they'll embrace this thing. But it's just a couple little things that are there. Yeah, go ahead.
So your slide talks about UTF-8 JSON. Your demo had system.txt.json.
Oh, did I not?
And UTF-8 JSON is a third party serializer, right?
Oh, I'm not using those. These are the underlying readers underneath that this uses. I'm actually not showing you the UTF-8 one. It's using the UTF-8 one. The UTF-8 reader and writer are really more primitive than these higher level abstractions of the serializer, the deserializer, and the document. Those use the UTF-8 reader and writer. Does that make sense? I didn't have an example of those.
There's also another third party out there called UTF-8 JSON.
It, probably so.
Even faster than text.
Okay. Maybe so. I haven't seen that one. I haven't used it. So. Okay. This is getting a little bit into the ASP.NET Core stuff. HTTP2, anybody familiar with that? There's 1.1 and then you have 2. So 2 is kind of the new hotness that's coming down the street, and it does a lot of really cool things. In the old days, when it came to headers, it's like, yeah, what's a header? I wonder if we should put anything in a header. Yeah, we probably don't need to put anything in the header. And so we didn't. And now the headers are chock full of stuff, and it's getting to be quite verbose, but you can't compress them in 1.1. So this brings compression. It brings server push. You can push data to clients. So the whole SignalR thing, that starts working natively. Fixing the head of line blocking problems, especially with 1.1. If you have, you know how if you look in Chrome, if you've opened up your debug tools and you see, I don't know what it is, like 8? I forget what the default is for Chrome, that it'll open a certain number of connections at one time. And once you open up that many, guess what? Nothing else is going to make a call until those start to return. And so essentially, if you had a whole bunch of, let's say, blocking images coming in from a CDN somewhere else, and those aren't returning, nothing else on your website is loading. So that can be really problematic. Is fixed by multiplexing, which is opening up a single connection and single TCP session and running a whole bunch of things through it at one time. And this is enabled by default, and it's negotiated. So you kind of get this. It's not quite free, but it's going to be free. TLS and OpenSSL on Linux, if you're interested in that. Cryptography, a couple new cryptographic ways to do things. Let's cover EF Core real quick. Reworked link. They did a bunch of stuff to make these expressions better. And if you've at all looked at those, I mean, my hat's off to the team. They're doing an awesome job of building the SQL that I would never even dream of writing. And I'm glad I don't have to write. But it's faster and better, more goodness. The big thing here is you now get a runtime exception for client-side query evaluation. And what that means is this. If we pop in here and we look at, which one? Context tests, right here. So here I have created a database context. If you're unfamiliar with in-memory databases, anybody use in-memory databases for their testing? Yeah, great way to do it. This is not a relational database. It is just an in-memory thing that kind of works like a relational database and will trick you a lot into thinking it's a relational database, but it's not. So just be aware of what it's good for, but it works great for cases like this. And here we're going to new one of these things up, and we're going to add some superheroes to it. We're going to save our changes, which really doesn't do anything. It just makes them available. And then we're going to say, hey, there's 2 of them. Now, I am going to say superheroes where I have a method called starts with. So right here, if we navigate in here, I have a method called starts with. This is going to see if the super name starts with a particular set of characters. And when I run that, it is going to throw an exception. Because in order to evaluate that, it has to run code that is inside of my object. It cannot execute that on the server, right? Because logic is written in C#, and it can't interpret that into a SQL server or whatever the heck you're going off of database call. And What it used to do is it would just say, oh, they want to run a little thing here locally. Let me just pull all the rows back, and I'll just evaluate them all one at a time. And while that gets the job done, it's not, you're kind of scratching your head. It's like, why is this thing so slow and running on a million rows? Well, it's because all the rows are coming back to your client, and it's evaluating every single one of them. And so rather than doing that, they're going to throw, unfortunately, a runtime exception, which is really all you can do. I would love to have a compile time exception, but you're getting a runtime exception off of this one right now. Yeah, I'm not sure how you get it any other way. Now, however, this line works. Why does this work? This one runs just fine. Right. What's 2S doing? Yeah, so if you want it to work like it used to work, this is how to make it work like it used to work. You just go toList, it's going to call the records back, and then you're going to evaluate them on the client. So now, if you want to make it work on the server side, this is what you do. Why does this work? It's the same code, isn't it? Exactly. So you got it. So in one case, I'm calling a method. It doesn't know how to look into that method and figure out what I'm doing. In this case, it says starts with. Oh, great. I know how to deal with starts with. I'm going to interpret it into a like clause or whatever I'm going to do to make that work in SQL Server land and be able to ship that off. So just be aware. This is something that's going on. I think, honestly, it's a good change because I've been bitten a number of times by, oh, man, it's EF. I didn't intend it, and so I'd rather get the exception on something I didn't intend to do. Great. Let's see. Cosmos DB, if you haven't looked into that, it's a good thing. It's distributed databases in Azure. Distributed SQL databases are very, very, very difficult. And this is a way to do it. .NET EF, if you're tooling for your .NET EF migrations, if you've run those migrations, they are now an external tool that you have to install. You can install them once, install them globally, install them per project, whatever you want to do. But you have to run another command to do it. If you try to run them, this is what you're going to run into. You can now intercept database operations before they go to the database or after they come back to allow you to intercept all operations. This is kind of cool, especially if you're building kind of frameworky kind of stuff. Interestingly enough, EF 6.3 full framework runs on .NET Core 3.0, which is pretty amazing when you think about it, that they figured out how to do that. That is really, really cool stuff. So old full framework library, this EF, the .NET Core is now fully featured enough that you can run the old version of it on there. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that unless you wanted a many-to-many automatic join table, which they may add at some point in time. It does have nullability support, and beware when you turn on the nullability, the non-nullable, like can't we just have a word that means not nullable, that is not a double negative? I wish there was it's a real thing, or like whatever the word is, but we obviously don't have that word. Mark will figure that out, Kevin. They're MVPs, they can do that stuff. That's really good stuff. And lazy loading from 2.1, but it's the devil, don't use it. If you're using lazy loading, just try to say no to lazy loading because it will just cause you many, many headaches. Be explicit whenever you can. I just had to throw that one in. It's just my little vendetta against lazy loading for using it for years and then being bitten a lot of times. Yeah, go ahead. Many-to-many still requires an intermediate table. They have not added that. And I have really mixed feelings about it. There's some really nice things about the way the older version, the full framework version of EF works. I guess you could go back and use 6.3 if you want to because it supports it. It does. And I didn't look to see on the roadmap when that's coming. I'm guessing they'll probably add it, but they haven't added it yet. Again, I don't feel horrible about it being a little more explicit, but it is nice, especially if you're doing it a lot with things like tags. I have 6 minutes, so I'm almost done. ASP.NET Core 3.0. Thankfully for Andrew, sitting in the back with headphones on, they now have Blazor. Who's familiar with Blazor? Great. So Blazor allows you to do C# on the client side and all kinds of crazy stuff. And I was listening, did you guys listen to, who are those two guys? Have the podcast, they just had a guy on. Don Rocks. Had a guy on talking about Blazor. Good. Cool. Okay.
Server-side Blazor is
Yes. Awesome. So good stuff. Go check it out. This could, again, whole entire talk just on that. gRPC, we moved from SOAP to REST, and now there's this thing gRPC, and it uses it because as great as REST is, there's really no contract, right? Okay, we're going to do Swagger, but it's for certain enterprise applications, it doesn't quite have the level of enterprisiness, lack of a better word, that you would like SOAP does. I mean, SOAP has so many options. This does bring some of that back, and it's not JSON, right? It's contract-based. It uses protobuf as the protocol in between, and it's HTTP2, and it allows for streaming, and so it's really a kind of a different thing. But I would really look into it if you're looking to build more complex RPC type of applications. Signaler updates, things like auto reconnect on the client, some custom authorization. We have Identity Server 4. We have new certificate authorization pieces. And thankfully, IIS exceptions are now written to the event log and not just let go into space. And then you have to go turn on all these layers of debugging. And you finally get to see them somewhere in a folder that is referenced by a number of different redirections. So I think there's some really good stuff there. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to cover. I had a little bit of C#8 stuff in here. Default interface implementations. I'm going to tell you, God, I thought this was really cool. So I'm not going to stop. What do you mean? Does anybody, okay, difference between C++ and C# inheritance? Anybody know? Yeah, single versus polymorphism, right? Now, what they've done in C# is allowed you to have method implementations inside of your interface, which effectively opens up polymorphic behaviors here. Now, I don't know that it's necessarily designed to do that. It does open that door. And there's a whole bunch of things as far as fewer contract breakages. It allows you to, like, let's say you have a method that has 4 different parameters you're passing in, and you want to have one with 2 and with 1 and with 0. And it allows you to specify those and all the default values, and then when the person implements, they only have to implement the 1 rather than having to implement every single one of these. Because if you have a large contract on an interface, it can be a hassle to implement. And so many times, they're just defaults, right? They're just simply, hey, I'm specifying these 3 defaults, and here's a flavor, and here's another flavor, and here's another flavor, just to make it easy, but it's really a hassle. And so this allows us to do this. There's some Java and iOS compatibility things that works out. Anyway, does not work with full framework.
So if you're curious what's the difference between default implementation and an abstract class has state.
Cool. Switch statement, you should really look at this. Really cool stuff you can do with switch statements. A number of different things as far as pattern matching, zip, 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 along with the ability to use tuples on that. Really cool stuff. The nullable types, you stick this, and there's actually a couple different, I clicked, now I can't, I'm stuck. If I let it up, it'll go to the next slide. You did, great. You showed how to do it. You have to actually go in and put this in your CS project file, so you're all good. Anyway, this does cause some issues, and just remember this null exclamation point. I don't know if Mark talked about that at all or not. It's the forgiving operator or something like that. The null forgiving operator. And you have to use these, and here's the case. When you turn this on, this is the problem you will have, because I turned it on, and this is the problem I ran into. Right here, in your DB context in EF, this variable right here on my DB set, this gets created by the constructor that is called as a result of this thing getting constructed, but by mine. And so there's no way that this thing can know that that variable is going to get set by a reflection thing that's going to make this all work, okay? So you have to do this, and that says, oh yeah, by the way, don't worry about this. You can reference this and assume that it's not going to be null. Otherwise, you get a dereferencing warning as you go through your app everywhere you try to reference, in this case, superheroes. So I think that's it for right now. Questions?
In that example, I would actually transfer the output of that file.
Yeah, we could.
Because you're going to have a bunch of them, and it's not actually changing anything. So one
Yeah.
is not changing anything.
Right, it's like Mark said before, it's allowing you to specify your intent. So yeah, you probably just want to turn it off for this particular file because it's going to be everywhere. But this is the first thing you're going to run into when you turn it on. You're going to find situations like this, like how do I get around it? And this is why the nullability thing gets kind of complicated. So, great, 30 seconds left. Any questions? Wait, oh yeah, go ahead. Oh, who had more slides? I see I covered a whole bunch of them really quick at the end just so I could get points for my slides. That's it, end of presentation. Yeah.